we have to be nimble and agile in how we deal with the threats that are out there, and we cannot assume that there'll be an indefinite peace dividend, and that freedom sometimes has a financial price attached to it. Liam Fox, MP for North Somerset, former Defence and former Trade Secretary.
And you also, which is very relevant for this, run this transatlantic organisation.
Yeah, so I think it's the key thing about Ukraine is to understand that the messaging is really important, that Putin must hear the same unambiguous support for Ukraine all the time. It's very, therefore, unfortunate if, for party political reasons, on either side of the Atlantic, people are sending the wrong signals, which could undermine the case that we've made all along, which is you cannot count on the West being weary about Ukraine.
So how concerned are you about this budget deal in the United States that seems to have been agreed while leaving out the commitment to continue the significant amounts of military and other support that the US is providing for Ukraine?
Well, I think that will be rectified when they get to a longer-term budgetary solution, and it's a great shame that something as important as the defence of democracy and the defence of freedom is used as a bargaining tool in the political toing and froing in the American Congress. I think what I take as comfort from that is that for most American politicians, they do understand the importance of the issue and why America's support is so key.
You say that, but Donald Trump, who is very likely to get the Republican nomination and could well be the next president of the United States, has already signaled that he doesn't want to continue paying as much money towards Ukraine, towards helping Ukraine.
Well, I think that, again, you have to always just lean off a little bit for what candidates say pre-election and what they do when they're actually in office. And I think the lesson has been that American governments have understood the need for American leadership on issues where you've got a country like Russia trampling all over the values that we all supposedly want to defend.
But we saw the way that Donald Trump behaved when he was last in power, the way he withdrew his support from so many international organizations. Are you not concerned that, we could be in a year from now in a situation where he's about to become the next president of the United States and that he may not want to continue supporting Ukraine?
Well, I think in the meantime that we should not allow our politics and our policies to be dependent upon what might or might not happen in an American election and what any candidate might or might not do after that election. We are there at the moment to give support to the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine. We need to continue to do that, and that has to be unequivocal. And I think that we need to line up with all those who are giving that support at the present time. It was a good thing that European leaders were in Ukraine today to be able to give that, and we should be lining up along that. Britain, from the very beginning, has given great leadership on the issue of Ukraine. In fact, many in Washington will say that America wouldn't have done as much as America has done had it not been British leadership in this particular area. So I think that we need to continue with that.
As you mentioned, we've had EU foreign ministers in Kyiv saying that they're not going to weary of supporting Ukraine, that they're going to maintain their support. But there are signs, aren't there, that support is fraying. We've got this dispute between Poland and Ukraine over grain exports. We've got a new leader in Slovakia who seems to be sending out signals that it can see merit in what Russia is doing.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. The Slovakian case, I think, is more worrying than what's happening in the United States in many ways, because you've got a Central European country potentially sending signals to Putin that they can understand why he did what he did. That is completely unacceptable, and I think we should say that. Any Western government who enjoys living in a safe and secure democratic environment has to side with the people of Ukraine, because what Russia did was illegal, it's barbaric, and it breaks all the norms of behaviour that we regard as acceptable.
We've seen this renewed counter-offensive by Ukraine. They have managed to push Russian forces out of some towns and villages, but they haven't really made the big gains that many people had hoped for. Do you think there is a risk that we're just heading into a stalemate in this conflict?
Well, as long as Ukraine is supplied with weaponry, as long as it's given what it needs to fight the battle, then it will be able to continue a counteroffensive. I think what we're seeing is the brutal fact that counteroffensives are much more costly in terms of lives and equipment than a simple defensive position is. But the people and the government of Ukraine want to maintain the integrity of their sovereign territory, which is absolutely their right to do.
Britain, as you say, has been at the forefront of the global support for Ukraine, but that is putting an additional strain on our military funding. We've had the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace talking about how he was asking for billions more. Do we need to spend more on defence if we're going to continue to provide the support for Ukraine, as well as doing all the other things that we're doing, including sending more forces to Kosovo at the moment?
Well, if we are required to spend more money for the sake of our national security, which I would think includes making sure that Putin doesn't win in Ukraine, then we'll have to do that. As a Conservative, I've always believed that the security of our nation is the number one priority for any British government.
Rishi Sunak, though, I'm struggling to think when I've even heard him talking about defence or the importance of defence spending.
I've heard the Prime Minister talk on numerous occasions about the importance of the battle in Ukraine and why it's important that Russia is not allowed to win. And that message must come unequivocally time and time again.
But is he going to have to provide more support for our armed forces? We keep hearing about the strains that they're under. And as you know, that means equipment as well as the troops themselves. Do we need to up our spending on defence as a country?
Well, we've certainly already increased our defence quite substantially under this government and under Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor, which Ben Wallace, of course, went out of his way to mention in his own resignation letter. The question for the Western Alliance as a whole will be, do we need to reappraise our 2% GDP contribution to NATO, for example, given the level of threat that we face? And that's a constantly changing picture. And we have to be nimble and agile in how we deal with the threats that are out there. And we cannot assume that there'll be an indefinite peace dividend. And that, freedom sometimes has a financial price attached to it.
Liam Fox, thank you very much indeed.